My name is Joseph Carroll. I'm a trauma critical care fellow here at UMC, born and raised in Arizona.
My name is Kay Francis. I'm from Reno, Nevada. I am one of the general surgery residents. This is my chief year.
I'm Brandon Snook, originally from Wisconsin, and recently separated and finished up with the Air Force, and I'm a trauma surgeon at UMC.
This trio has worked together for nearly 2 years. Their training would be tested on Sunday, October 1st.
We didn't actually know there was a mass shooting, and neither did trauma. We just knew that there was, at least I was told from one of my fellow colleagues that was in trauma, I got a phone call that said, please come to trauma now. We're going to get at least 20 gunshot wounds.
Just said we have multiple patients coming in with a lot of gunshot wounds. There's been a shooting down on the strip, and I kind of hopped in the car and drove it.
It's a shock because you never expect it to happen. I mean, you always train for it, but you never know that it's going to happen.
So they're on their way. Dr. Francis, you're already there. What was the moment for you when you realized this could be a mass casualty event that we're dealing with?
Probably about 11 when Dr. Snook showed up, and I started hearing about what was going on outside is when I started noticing, wow, we have patients that are still on gurneys, and we didn't even have enough beds in Trauma Bay. So they stayed on the gurneys they came in on.
The trauma area normally has room for about 11 patients, and there were probably 30 to 35 patients in there.
We were triaging by putting a piece of paper on the patient's bed with them and writing down, okay, this patient has a gunshot wound here, it needs a CT here. Or this patient, hey, this patient's more acute, this patient needs to go to the OR now.
105 patients arrived alive. 105 patients left alive. The team didn't lose anyone.
Was there a family or a patient who maybe still sort of resonates with you, like, oh, I remember that guy, I remember that woman?
We found a patient in there that they had sent that had a gunshot wound actually to the groin area. And in there, he actually started bleeding in CAT scan area. And thankfully we were there, we were watching it. And we immediately held pressure. And this is, I don't know if any of the pictures, but this is one where the bleeding was down the hallway. And he looks at me and he goes, I feel like I'm going to die, please save me.
There was one patient that was a gunshot wound to the abdomen. They were pretty severely injured. They had undergone an initial surgery, and then they were in the ICU. And I remember the next day, probably around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, it was his mom came running into the ICU and found out that he was alive, and she just was basically on the floor almost crying. She was so ecstatic and so happy. I mean, unfortunately he was quite ill, but I mean just the overwhelming joy that know that your family member was alive, yeah. I think that still sticks out in my head.
How would you sum up how 1 October changed you?
I'll never forget this day. Just like I know the victims will never forget this day. They'll be with us forever. We're feeling for them too, and Vegas is behind them forever.
Made me realize that what we do is important, and that even though one person can do such horrific damage, it can change the whole city and bring everyone together.
I think there are people that are still going through a lot of healing processes and that sort of thing, so I just, you know, by way of encouragement, just, you know, keep on, so.
Stay Vegas strong.
Yes.
Yeah.